Somewhere over the Pacific, a top-secret American satellite vanished. No explosion, no distress call, just silence. It was 1968, the height of the Cold War, and that missing satellite carried secrets powerful enough to shift the balance between the US and the Soviet Union. Was it sabotage? A malfunction? Or something that neither side ever dared to admit? Most who watch these stories never subscribe. But if you believe history's buried truths deserve to be remembered, do it now. Because what we're about to uncover was never meant to be seen. It's March 1968. Somewhere high above the Pacific Ocean, a silent satellite is moving through space, faster than a bullet. Below, the Earth is calm and dark. Above, this satellite carries the most advanced spy equipment America has ever built. Giant lenses, long rolls of film and sensors designed to spot anything the Soviets might be hiding. It's called Corona KH-9 Hexagon, part of a top-secret US program known as Project Keyhole. Its mission: to take detailed photographs of Soviet missile sites, submarine bases, and nuclear facilities. Every frame of film it captures could change how the Cold War is fought. At 2:19 a.m. GMT, Mission Control at Vandenberg Air Force Base in California is tracking the satellite. Everything looks normal. Then, silence. The signal cuts out. No warning, no alarm, just gone. Controllers wait for the re-entry capsule, a small metal sphere that's supposed to parachute back to Earth, where a US plane will catch it mid-air. Hours pass. The plane circles the recovery zone again and again. But the capsule never appears. No debris, no splash, no trace at all. The official report uses one word: lost. But behind that word lies a much bigger mystery. Was it a technical failure? Did the Soviets somehow interfere? Or did something else happen? Something no one was willing to admit. Here's what makes it even stranger. A few months later, Soviet ships start showing up in a remote part of the Pacific, far from normal fishing routes. Not long after, American intelligence picks up unusual radio traffic, encrypted messages between Soviet naval vessels. It looks like a recovery mission. The CIA takes notice. They quietly begin their own top-secret operation, Project Azorian, officially described as a deep-sea mining project funded by billionaire Howard Hughes. But that was just a cover story. In reality, the Americans were trying to recover something that had sunk deep into the Pacific, something tied to a missing US satellite. Before we get into that part of the story, we need to step back. Because to understand why one missing satellite could trigger such massive secret missions, you have to understand what was happening at the time. The Cold War wasn't just a standoff between two superpowers, it was a race for information, and that race had moved into space. By the late 1960s, satellites weren't just pieces of metal orbiting the Earth, they were the eyes of the nations, watching, recording, and waiting. This is the story of the satellite that disappeared, and the secrets that vanished with it. To understand how one missing satellite became a Cold War obsession, we need to go back a decade, to the late 1950s. In October 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik 1. It was just a shiny metal sphere, about the size of a beach ball, but it changed everything. When its signal, that steady beep, 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 echoed across the world, it sent a shock through Washington. The Soviets had beaten America into space. If they could put a satellite in orbit, maybe they could send a nuclear warhead across the ocean too. The US scrambled to respond. Within months, America created NASA, expanded the Air Force's missile programs, and launched its own space missions. But not all of them were meant for science. Behind the public rocket launches, another race had already begun, a secret one. The goal wasn't exploration, It was surveillance. By 1960, the CIA and the US Air Force had quietly launched a program called Corona. Its purpose was simple: take photographs of the Soviet Union from space. Before this, the US had relied on high-altitude U-2 spy planes, but after one was shot down in 1960 and its pilot, Francis Gary Powers, was captured, that door slammed shut. President Eisenhower needed another way to see behind the Iron Curtain. Corona was that way. Each satellite carried long rolls of photographic film, thousands of meters of it, wrapped inside a special re-entry capsule. Once full, the capsule would detach, re-enter Earth's atmosphere, deploy a parachute and be caught mid-air by a US recovery aircraft before it hit the ocean. It sounds almost impossible now, but it worked. Those first photos changed American intelligence forever. For the first time, the US had eyes everywhere: missile bases in Kazakhstan, nuclear sites in the Urals, submarine docks on the Arctic coast. Every orbit meant new information, new targets, and new leverage. By the mid-1960s, Corona was one of the most successful secret programs in US history, but the technology didn't stop there. Each generation of satellites became sharper, faster, and more advanced. The KH-1, KH-4, KH-7, each one pushed the limits of what orbit could do. By the time the KH-9 hexagon came online in the late 1960s, it wasn't just taking pictures. It was mapping the world in incredible detail. The KH-9 was so large and complex that engineers nicknamed it Big Bird. It carried up to 60 miles of film and could photograph objects as small as a few feet across from 200 miles above Earth. But with power came paranoia. Every mission was classified at the highest level. Every launch was monitored by both sides. The Soviets, of course, were building their own reconnaissance satellites, Zenit, Yantar, Resurs, trying to match the Americans' reach. Space had become an invisible battlefield. It's hard to imagine now, but back then satellites weren't digital. There were no computers streaming images to the ground. If a capsule was lost, the film and all the intelligence on it was gone forever. That's what made the 1968 disappearance so terrifying. It wasn't just the loss of a machine. It was the loss of possibly the most sensitive material the United States had ever put into orbit. And there was another fear, one no one wanted to say out loud. What if the Soviets found it first? What if that capsule lying somewhere deep in the Pacific was now in Soviet hands? That possibility turned a routine space failure into a national security nightmare. It's what led to the secret missions, the cover stories, and years of silence. And it all started with a single blip on a radar screen that vanished into static. The world would soon find out. The race for space didn't end with rockets. It just moved underwater. It was March 5th, 1968, just before dawn at Vandenberg Air Force Base in California. The air was still, the sky clear. On the launch pad stood a Titan III rocket, carrying the latest in the KH-9 Hexagon series, America's top-secret spy satellite. Only a small group of officers, engineers, and intelligence staff even knew what it was. To everyone else, it was just another classified defense payload. At 6:01 a.m. local time, the engines ignited. The ground shook as the rocket lifted off, trailing a white plume that vanished into the upper atmosphere. Everything went exactly as planned. Telemetry was stable. Orbit was achieved. The satellite deployed its sensors, opened its camera doors, and began its first passes over Soviet territory. For the next several days, everything seemed normal. Mission Control received steady data. Orbit reports, minor adjustments, all routine. Then, during its 12th orbit, the signal began to flicker. Controllers noticed small irregularities, slight deviations, strange fluctuations in power levels. At first, they assumed it was just interference. But minutes later, all contact was lost. Operators tried to re-establish the link, sending coded commands into the void. Nothing came back. The silence stretched for hours. Then the realization hit. The satellite was gone. The next step was recovery. Each KH-9 carried several re-entry capsules, each filled with exposed film. These capsules were supposed to detach, fall back through the atmosphere, and deploy parachutes for mid-air recovery over the Pacific. A US JC-130 Hercules aircraft waited in the designated drop zone, a remote stretch of ocean between Hawaii and Midway. But the capsule never appeared. No radar trace, no splash detection, no beacon. It was as if the satellite and everything on it had been erased from existence. At first, the Air Force classified it as a malfunction, but deep inside the Pentagon and CIA headquarters, nobody believed it was that simple. They'd spent years perfecting the hexagon systems. Losing one entirely didn't make sense. Within hours, analysts began to suspect something else. If the capsule didn't make it back, where did it go? And if it came down somewhere unexpected, could someone else have found it? Here's where the story gets stranger. Weeks later, American listening stations in the Pacific started picking up faint Soviet naval transmissions. The Soviets were moving ships into a section of the ocean far from their normal routes, close to where the US capsule was last expected to be. It looked like they were searching for something. Something big. For US intelligence, that set off alarm bells. If the Soviets had found a downed American satellite, especially a KH-9, they'd have access to America's most secret imaging technology. Every lens, every sensor, every classified design could be studied, copied, or used to counter future missions. So the CIA decided to find out exactly what the Soviets were doing. They launched a parallel operation under deep cover. Naval reconnaissance aircraft began flying distant patrols over the suspected zone. Submarines were dispatched to quietly monitor Soviet activity. Then came an unexpected twist. On March 8, 1968, just 3 days after the satellite vanished, a massive explosion was detected underwater in the same region of the Pacific. Seismic sensors picked it up as the equivalent of a small nuclear detonation. But this wasn't a test. It was the Soviet submarine K-129, which had mysteriously sunk with all hands aboard. At first, nobody connected the two events. But inside the intelligence community, a quiet theory began to circulate. What if the submarine hadn't just exploded? What if it had collided with something, or been part of a secret mission to recover something? There was no proof, just patterns. But for the US, it didn't matter. Now both sides were interested in what lay at the bottom of the Pacific. In 1969, the CIA proposed an idea that sounded like science fiction. Build a massive deep-sea ship capable of lifting wreckage, or an entire submarine, from the ocean floor, undetected. It would take years to plan, and it needed a cover story that no one would question. That's how Project Azorian was born. Officially, it was described as an effort by billionaire Howard Hughes to mine manganese nodules from the seabed using a gigantic vessel called the Glomar Explorer. In reality, it was designed to do something far more ambitious: recover the sunken Soviet K-129, and possibly any other valuable wreckage in that area. Some believe that included debris from the missing US satellite. It's never been confirmed, but the timing, the location, and the secrecy all line up too closely to ignore. When the Glomar Explorer finally began its recovery mission in 1974, it brought up part of the K-129, along with several pieces of metallic debris the CIA never publicly identified. What those fragments were and where they came from remain classified. But one thing's clear: the operation wasn't just about a Soviet submarine. It was about recovering secrets, whoever's they were, and that's where the trail of the missing satellite ends. No official recovery was ever reported. No photographs, no wreckage, no admission that it even existed. The mission logs were sealed. The files were buried under new code names. Even decades later, when parts of the KH-9 program were declassified, that particular launch was missing from the records. It's as if it never happened, but it did. And somewhere in the deep Pacific, under miles of cold water, lies the truth. A truth neither superpower ever wanted the world to see. After the disappearance, official statements were few and carefully worded. Inside the Pentagon there was quiet panic, but outside no one even knew a satellite was missing. Everything about the KH-9 program was classified top secret. Even members of Congress who funded it weren't told the full story. The US simply listed the mission as a launch failure. That was standard procedure during the Cold War. When a spy satellite was lost, it wasn't announced, it just vanished from public records. But inside the intelligence community, that loss hit hard. It wasn't just about the hardware. It was about the film. Thousands of high-resolution images of Soviet military installations stored inside those capsules. That film represented months of data collection, billions of dollars in research, and a massive strategic advantage. If any of it had fallen into Soviet hands, it could reveal what the US knew, and, more dangerously, what it didn't know. Behind closed doors, engineers and analysts worked non-stop to figure out what had gone wrong. They examined launch telemetry, onboard systems, and orbital decay predictions. Nothing explained the total loss of contact. No explosion, no debris, no sign of re-entry. It was like the satellite had slipped through a crack in reality. At the same time, CIA analysts kept watching the Soviets' moves. The unusual naval activity continued for months after the K-129 disaster. Every time Soviet ships passed through that same patch of ocean, US surveillance aircraft recorded it. It wasn't clear if they were searching for their own submarine or for something else. Then came Project Azorian in 1974, years later but directly connected. While the official story was that it was a Soviet sub-recovery, several of the people involved privately hinted that the operation had multiple objectives. In the declassified documents that were eventually released, entire paragraphs about what was retrieved were blacked out. Some historians believe that parts of the lost KH-9, maybe a capsule, maybe debris, were quietly recovered during that mission. If so, it was never admitted publicly. What's certain is that after 1968, the US made major changes to its satellite recovery system. Newer models were equipped with stronger transmitters, more accurate beacons, and backup recovery capsules. By the early 1970s, the US had started transitioning from film-based systems to early digital imaging. Data transmitted directly to ground stations. No more physical capsules, no more ocean retrievals, and no more chances of a spy satellite simply disappearing. In a strange way, the loss forced progress. It pushed engineers to move beyond analog film, to build satellites that could send images in real time, and it pushed intelligence agencies to rethink what classified really meant, because even the most secret project was vulnerable to the unknown. As for the Soviets, they never officially commented. No recovery was claimed. No evidence surfaced in their archives after the USSR collapsed. If they found anything, they buried it deep, and if they didn't, the silence served them just as well. A missing US satellite, especially one that might have crashed near their patrol routes, was a useful mystery to leave hanging. By the mid-1970s, both sides had moved on to new technology, but the story of that lost satellite never fully went away. Among intelligence officers, it became a ghost story, a reminder that even the most advanced systems could fail in total silence. Years later, When parts of the KH-9 hexagon program were declassified, reporters noticed something strange. In the official list of launches, one was missing. The gap matched the date of the 1968 mission. Even the numbering skipped over it, as if that satellite had been erased from history itself. Whether that was intentional or just bureaucratic confusion, no one knows. But it left a question hanging that still hasn't been answered. Did the US ever find its missing satellite? Or did it end up in the hands of its greatest rival? Either way, the message was clear. In the Cold War, even space wasn't a safe place to keep secrets. So what really happened to the missing Cold War spy satellite? Decades later, we still don't know. Maybe it malfunctioned and burned up on re-entry. Maybe it broke apart quietly in orbit. Or maybe, just maybe, it's still down there somewhere, buried deep in the Pacific, under layers of salt, darkness, and secrecy. What we do know is this: the Cold War was never just a battle of weapons. It was a battle for information and for control over who got to know the truth. Both sides built worlds of secrecy that ran deeper than most people could imagine. Entire programs existed in locked rooms with no official names. Engineers worked on parts of machines they didn't fully understand. Pilots flew missions they could never talk about. And sometimes things went missing. Not because of failure, but because they had to. The missing satellite became one of those stories, a perfect symbol of the Cold War itself. High technology, hidden motives, and a silence that still lingers long after the missions ended. Here's the strange part. When the Cold War finally ended and archives slowly opened, historians expected answers. But on this case, they found almost nothing. No wreckage, no photos, no explanation. Just missing paperwork, redacted lines, and the quiet suggestion that some mysteries are meant to stay unsolved. And maybe that's the point. The Cold War wasn't about clarity. It was about uncertainty. About living in a world where both sides knew that one mistake, one misunderstanding could destroy everything. In that kind of world, secrets were both protection and poison. They kept nations safe, and they kept truth buried. What makes the story of the missing satellite haunting isn't just that it vanished. It's what it represents. The lengths humans will go to watch, to control, to outsmart one another. And how in chasing absolute security, we often create new shadows to hide in. Somewhere locked away in a government vault or lying silent under miles of ocean, the remains of that mission might still exist. The cameras, the film, maybe even the answers, but even if someone finds them one day, it might not matter anymore. Because the real story isn't about the machine. It's about the mindset that built it, a world that believed information could be power, that secrets could guarantee safety, yet never realized how fragile both were. So maybe the satellite didn't just disappear. Maybe it was buried along with an era, one that taught us that even at the edge of space, human fear and ambition are never far apart. The Cold War is over. The satellites have changed. But the sky is still full of eyes, and the question remains, how much do we really want to know, when knowing comes with a price? Some say the satellite still lies buried beneath miles of ocean. Others believe the truth was buried with it. But one thing is certain. The Cold War didn't just fill the sky with machines. It filled history with secrets we're still trying to understand. If you believe these stories should never fade into silence, subscribe, share, and keep these echoes alive. Because history isn't just what happened. It's what we choose to remember.